The UFC is on top of the world when it comes to combat sports right now, and EA UFC 4 seems to be right on time with its release. I've always been balls deep into the sport and was looking forward to being able to get back into the cage, but after my time with the game, my experience left me feeling pretty split. Welcome to Rugged Pro Gaming, where I display a real-time interactive representation of my review score, which will increase or decrease in tandem with my verbal pros and cons. As always, we will begin with a perfect 10 and adjust accordingly throughout the review, but enough explaining, let's get right into it.
Yo, he wants to hear about your first fight.
I hear it's a good one.
He hates when I tell the story, but oh man, I will never forget the first time I saw this kid. He was getting busted up. He looked like a zombie.
Let's be honest, a lot of players plan to sink time into the career mode to create a fighter and chase gold, and that chase is always one of my main allures for games such as these. In UFC 4, the career mode opens up with you taking a beating in your first amateur fight, but impressing a local MMA coach who was in attendance. Coach Davis sees something in you during your whooping and takes you under his wing to train you to become a champ. I typically create myself in these kinds of games, but I decided to go with creating Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher titles just to add some flair. I don't know why I didn't just name him The Witcher instead of Geralt Rivia, but hey, mistakes were made, but the Butcher of Blaviken has arrived nonetheless. After a few stints of amateur bouts, I was eventually invited to Dana White Contender Series, and as someone who's never missed an episode, I was excited to be a part of the event. But EA dropped the ball with his representation of the show. The Apex Arena itself looked great, but I would have loved to see a cutscene of my character speaking about his backstory or showing Dana react to my spectacular KO. It would have been nice to see some charm added for fans of the series, but there was none of that. I fought, I won, and I was rewarded with a contract earned screen that just felt rushed and uninspired with no regards to realism. This is kind of how the entire career plays out, unfortunately. EA failed at immersing the player into the true life of a fighter. The foundation is definitely there. You can train and spar with different partners, occasionally respond to people on social media, train and learn from other UFC fighters, or watch tape on your opponents to unlock information about them. The problem is, everything I just mentioned remains at the most basic level, just as how I explained it. What I mean is, there's no expanding upon the basic idea of doing these things. They just are what they are. Training with sparring partners is exactly the same every time. Responding on social media always remains the same. Nothing ever evolves, and it makes the fight week preparation feel like a drag. As a die-hard fan of MMA, I know that training a UFC fighter is not this simple. There is no cardio training whatsoever here. No running hills, no pool work. And although I never switched weight classes, there was still no aspect of weight cutting, which is the most important facet to fight preparation that there is. There was so much that could have been added to make the game feel more true to life and increase the fun factor, but it remains shallow in terms of activities and realism to prepare for your fights. I kind of have to call out EA here because in a lot of ways this career mode just feels lazy. I'm not one to rant, but the copy and paste with this kind of career mode structure has been going on since the early days of Fight Night. There's been little evolution through the years, and when there is a step taken forward in the right direction, it takes a back step and removes those features in the next release. They definitely have the tools to make a much better career mode. They've shown this in the past with story modes such as Fight Night Champion and even in Madden. But for reasons unknown, they haven't shown UFC 4 career mode the same kind of service. If you played recent EA UFC titles, it really isn't anything innovative to see here, but that is something expected since you can only really update fighting mechanics by so much between releases. Whether this is a good or bad thing really depends on the player. Fighting in a game is fun. Let's get that out of the way first. But how long that fun lasts is up for debate. When playing the game, you're not going to be unimpressed, but that's not to say that the gameplay is perfect, because there's definitely still room for obvious improvements. While the grappling system in clinch game has been updated and simplified, the carnage of a fistfight has yet to be captured in its true essence. UFC 2 did a good job making impacts feel real with the physics system, but since EA decided to go with animation reactions instead, the game feels more arcadey opposed to a more realistic simulation. The ground and pound is especially awkward. You feel like you're punching on a mound of clay, and when finishing someone with a TKO, they kinda just go limp and the game just stops. You can't lay on any extra punishment, the ref doesn't push or tackle you off. It's the exact opposite of what UFC fighters live by, which is to keep attacking until the ref stops you. The only way I could really make this make sense to me is that EA wants to keep the game more appealing to younger audiences by not making the game brutal. But it's a brutal sport, and not allowing true TKOs or doctor stoppages is a disservice to fans. But in the same breath, they add backyard fighting, which amplifies blood and cuts, so I'm really at a loss for the decision making going on at EA as to why certain elements are left out. The backyard fighting arena was, however, a fun addition to the game, allowing players to create some dream matches that they'd love to see play out in a street fight. It's definitely a bit gimmicky, but it was still enjoyable. Same goes for the Kumite Arena, paying homage to Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport film. These were nice additions, and also I love playing knockout mode in these venues, which gives you a health bar, making the experience feel like a traditional fighting game. There are a good amount of other ways to spend your time as well, including creating your own dream events and tackling some of the game's online modes, but the game is only as good as the effort you put into it, which is not how gaming should work. The game should be inviting for players, but UFC 4 seems to only benefit players that are deeply invested. It's almost like having to meet the pizza man halfway in order to get your pizza delivered. I felt like I had to make excuses for the game to keep me going, trying to understand how the game was meant to be enjoyed. But the reality is the fun factor is just pretty bare. I remember back in 2009, I was broke, I couldn't afford games, and I would play THQ's UFC Undisputed demo of Rampage vs. Chuck Liddell over and over again, and I never got tired of it. The gameplay here doesn't give me those same feels. I have to create some kind of meaning to every fight in order for the fun to last. I couldn't just load up normal matches and find enjoyment consistently. Instead, I had to resort to creative means, such as open weight fights putting a heavyweight against a flyweight and whooping his ass. Speaking of creativity, the new clothing options are so completely ridiculous but also so satisfying. Being able to customize your character with lion heads, samurai mask, and even shorts and shirts that have animated graphics on it is so ludicrous but welcome. I already want to create the Ghost of Tsushima and Rey Mysterio and take them online. The grind to collect the coins to purchase these pieces of gear did somewhat amplify my fleeting enjoyment with the game as I began to seek out challenges to complete in order to earn extra coins. And it's nice to see EA add something so bizarre from left field, but I can't help to think that this wasn't just a sneaky way to get some microtransactions in their pockets. As mentioned, completing challenges is a grindy way to earn coins to purchase the items that you want, but the option to skip that grind and purchase with real money is easily available in true EA fashion. Another saving grace was online matches. Playing online allowed me to care deeply about my skill level, which led to me putting more time into the game. While it was fun running through some stand and bang fights online, the true fun is to be had during the awesome new Blitz Battles and Online World Championship mode. Blitz Battles is basically EA's attempt at fitting a Battle Royale mode into UFC. Each day there's a different mode ranging from KO mode, 1-minute rounds, and other custom rule matches. There's a ladder of 5 matches, and each time you win you advance to the next match facing off against someone who also won in the previous rounds. But losing causes you to start the climb from the bottom once again. The only downside is that the custom rules for the Blitz mode only changes once per day, so if the rules are something you don't have much fun with, you'd have to wait for the rule set to reset the next day. The Online World Championship mode actually challenged you to win consecutive fights while gaining rank before being able to challenge the current champion, and that champion has earned the belt through climbing the online ranking themselves. Once obtaining the championship belt, the goal is to defend it as much as possible. This mode feels more true to the grind of becoming a world champion, even more so than the career mode does, surprisingly, and is a great start to a promising online competition for upcoming UFC titles in the future. But even with the fun online fights and unlockable clothing options in mind, the fun factor in a lot of ways felt like an actual fight, going 5 intense rounds, but not as someone like Demetrius Johnson or Kamaru Usman, but instead as someone like Roy Nelson. The fatigue hits pretty quickly.
Well, always exciting when this guy shows up on the fight card, Daniel. He is a true mixed martial artist. Not really any glaring weaknesses, at least, that he's put on film thus far.
He's the new breed of fighter. Those kids that start doing everything at 6 years old.
UFC 4 does a good job of their representation of the fighters. The stances are on point, from Israel Adesanya's footwork to Clay Guida's nonstop bouncing. When you choose a fighter, you really feel like you're in his or her shoes. The game also does well with player likeness. Stipe Miocic seemingly has no lips, and Daniel Cormier's shit stain is visible on his chest.
Bruh.
The problems come with the detailing of these features. The fighters look like themselves, but like wax figures of themselves. They don't have the lifelike detail that is needed to really hit the presentation out of the park. There's some nice touches, such as fighters visibly breathing as their stomachs expand during inhales, but as soon as you notice nice details such as that, you'll also notice faults like blurry textures on their fight shirts as well. We've all seen the comments and heard the rants about the game looking as if it was released last generation, and it's easy to see why people feel that way when looking closely. But on the same token, looking closely at other times reveals some impressive details. Cuts and blood specifically look brutal, even dripping from a fighter when you really carve them up. The blood and cuts are so impressive, it's again surprising to not see any kind of doctor stoppages, because it's gloriously entertaining busting up some virgin you hate over and over and over again. Visuals are only half of the pie, however, and although there's some issues there, I'm happy to say that the audio presentation is awesome. Specifically the commentary between John Anik and Daniel Cormier.
No place kick there by Rose Namajunas. Educated jab right there from...
Oh! She is such a diverse striker. That big strike landed, and it looks like she's going to finish the fight.
I'll admit, when hearing about Joe Rogan's departure from the game, I was a bit uneasy. Not only because he's one of my favorite people to listen to, but his fight commentary and his voice is just so iconically UFC. You can't hear Joe Rogan speak and not think about the UFC, but the commentary in the game is fantastic on its own. The way they call out the fight stats in the middle of the fight sounds completely seamless and not a bottle recording whatsoever. No matter who you're fighting with, the commentary seems to have tailored talking points for you, your opponent, and the course of the fight, as if EA had recorded them for every possible scenario imaginable. Although I still would love to see Joe Rogan back in the game, and even Dominic Cruz, Paul Felder, Michael Bisping, or Brendan Fitzgerald, I'm happy with the bantering of Anik and Cormier going forward.
This isn't one of those stories where you find someone amazing out in the middle of nowhere just knocking people out. No. I just found a kid with heart.
EA's design choices are a mixed bag, and for the most part are done pretty oddly. The menu systems are easy to navigate and not confusing at all. Everything is packaged nicely and easily accessible. The character selection, however, could have been done much better to be more appealing for returning players. Visually, the character selection is not that great. It's hard to imagine that the character selection could go from this to this to this.
Bruh.
Granted, UFC 4 does have the most approachable character selection, making it easy to quickly choose your fighter without the need to shuffle past a ton of unwanted people. So in that way, it does improve upon past titles. It's still ugly as shit though. Another odd design choice is the lack of stats shown for each fighter when selecting them. You get to see their overall in the form of stars, but can't see the fighter's stats unless you hit the triangle or Y button. That's not an issue, but the game doesn't have any on-screen heads up that if you hit that button, you can display the extra information about that character. I stumbled on this shit completely by accident. You get to see a character's perks, moves, height, weight, and their stats, which are also on a 5-star scale, but these stats also are on a 99-point scale as well, which caught me off guard. I was never a fan of the 5-star system when it was announced, and I love the 99 overall scale that's been used in EA Sports titles for as long as I can remember. My problem with the star scale is that it doesn't create separation between individual fighters, but instead bunches them in groups based on their star rating. True MMA fans know that there's levels to this fight game. So even if you have a guy like Curtis Blaze or Alistair Overeem who are talented guys, they aren't on the level of Daniel Cormier or Francis Ngannou, but they're all ranked 4.5 stars, which bunches them in the same tier. It's not an accurate portrayal of the levels in the UFC, and having number overalls would fix that. Even with the stats having a number representation alongside the stars, the main overall doesn't have a number paired to it, which was off, so I dug even deeper. I added up Khabib Nurmagomedov and Francis Ngannou's skill points individually and divided them by the amount of skills to get an overall skill number, and was surprised to see that Francis landed at only a 90 overall and Khabib landed at only a 91, a handful of points lower than where I think he should be as arguably the most dominant active champion in the UFC. I think this may be the reason why the main overall doesn't have a number, because quite simply the stat rating just doesn't add up. UFC 4 is a game I wanted to love. I wanted to allow the game to take over my life for the better part of a few months. As a fan of the sport, I had high expectations, and with those expectations set so high, the fall hurts even more. EA delivered a basic representation of a product that I love so much, with lack of inspiration almost all across the board. The game isn't bad, but all of its promising potential is unfortunately left untapped. I suppose, as Max Holloway would say, it just is what it is.
Bread is in the building, and these guys just flapping gums at each other any chance they get.